Okay, good morning. My name is Jane Dutton, and I'm involved with adult faith formation. And it is my total pleasure to introduce my wonderful colleague, Sid Smith. I asked her if I could introduce her because I wanted to make sure that certain fun facts were known. I'm going to share
Whoa,
four.
that might not be such a good idea.
So
Whoa.
there's actually serious fun facts. The first thing you know is that Sid Smith is a retired Lorna G. Goodison Distinguished University Professor of English and Women's Studies. And that in and of itself tells you a lot about Sid's strength and incredible accomplishments. As best I could tell from exploring her website, she has written at least 13 books and is a world-renowned scholar in English and women's studies. So how lucky are we to have her in this role? On her 80th birthday, Bill Kinley, who's right here, made this milestone birthday especially special. He helped to create the Sidoni Smith Undergraduate Study Abroad Support Fund that in the Department of English in honor of her own experience as a student and doing international travel.
Study abroad, yeah.
Yeah, that was really important. But that wasn't all. He also helped to endow the Sidoni Smith Award for Doctoral Studies in the Humanities Fund for joint PhD program for students who are in the joint PhD program in women's and gender studies in English. And I can tell you that is just such a gift to doctoral students in this special field to be able to have the funding they need to bring their work to a closure. But here are the fun facts. She loves to dance. I actually love seeing her dance. She's a world traveler and is becoming the head of Adult Faith Formation work group and is known within our community as an incredible question asker. So when she raises her hand, everyone defers. So we're so pleased that she was willing to start off this three-part series that we're doing in her unique and very wonderful way. So thank you, Sid.
Thank you, Jane. And thank you, hardy people who are here on this morning when we ran late and there's a lot of snow. So I know nothing about fear. My field is something else. But for about 45 minutes, I'm going to speak as if I do know something about fear. And the one thing about being an academic that you can be sure of is you've got to be able to talk about things you know nothing about and sound really authoritative. So just for those of you who are interested in this, this is a beautiful, it's a painting by Gustave Doré, a French artist in the 19th century. He did a whole series on the Divine Comedy, illustrating it. That's Dante is the very early modern Italian poet who wrote the Divine Comedy, first the Inferno, then the Purgatorio, then the Heaven, third of that work. So Doré did a whole series here, and this is one of the circles of hell where people who were lovers during their life are condemned to endless. I shouldn't have brought this inside the church, but copulation. I shouldn't even say that word in church. Anyway, so that's the artist behind this, because I like to do some good artwork and do some good poetry while I talk about things I don't know anything about. So, if you think about it, you know that humans confront all kinds of fears during their lifetime. There are fears intimate, fears familial, fears communal, fears national, fears global, fears cosmic. There's fears existential, fears embodied, political, environmental, spiritual, religious, social, generational. There are all those kinds of fears. Fears disruptively violent or slow burning. Fears manipulatively mobilized or transformative. Fears conducive to tapping the depths of empathy and destructive of that empathy. So what I thought I'd do today is just do what I've done when I've done these others, speaking about hell, speaking about grace, speaking about God over the last couple of years, is just kind of throw a lot of ideas out for you to think about in terms of how you understand what fear is, how it operates, what are how do we think, get our head around grappling with fear. And really, in doing that, we're getting at what it means to be human and how we want to live our lives, or how a life is meant to be lived, all tied with what we understand fear to be. So here's a cluster of adjacent words that sometimes are synonyms for fears: worry, dread, anxiety, terror, trauma, panic, fright. Can you think of other words that I haven't got on here that come to your mind about fear, or other words that we might use for that? Yep. Scariness, or something. I'm trying to get the verb. The noun. The unknown. Yep. A phobia. Yep. A phobia. Pardon? Alarm. Yep. All these words that, and there are more, and we'll probably be throwing more of them out as we go along. So we can think about fear and fearfulness as, first of all, as primal mechanisms for human beings to deal with threats. And I'm going to come back to that in a minute. But I also want to emphasize that they are multiple. Fears are multiple, and they're often intersecting with other kinds of fears to create not just this kind of fear plus this kind of fear together, but different valences, different ways that fear is experienced, expressed, and formative of human beings. And then there are these layers of temporalities. Now, this is, Bill always teases me about having long words in our conversation. So this is one of those that's about 6 syllables, temporalities. And you may know that word just as one temporality. You might even use that, but I use it as a way of signaling there are multiple kinds of temporal conditions and time lines that are involved in fears, different kinds of fears. So we can have a fear that's latent inside our bodies that is released later on. And that fear has kind of 2 kinds of temporalities. The moment of the fear as becoming embedded in the body, and the moment of the recollection of the fear and the reanimation of the fear in the body. So this is just a way of saying fear is a very complex concept. And that's what I want to go through, different kinds of fears. So let's just think about primal fear, which is the automatic response of the body. And we usually use those 3 terms with it: fight, flight, or freeze. What it is that human beings are kind of instinctively do through the autonomic nervous system. The amygdala is at the center of this primal fear, or primal relationship to fear, or expression of fear or experience of fear. And it is known to have a primary role in how memory is processed, our memories repressed, our memories suddenly thrown up out of the subconscious? Are they kind of lingering at the sides of your vision? And then then decision-making and emotional responses to fear. That's the kind of where the amygdala comes in this limbic system. And then the nervous system emits stress hormones when confronted with fear and the effects of fear on the human being. And that often, those stress hormones are related to whether you end up, sorry, it's hard to talk over a phone. That's all right. Whether you end up moving into a fight position or a fright position or freeze position, like don't know what to do or just go still. And these are all ancient responses. It's kind of the oldest part of our animal being that we carry in our body. And it was an ancient system for surviving predators, but it's activated now in our everyday life all the time. So it's both primal and then temporally specific or a temporally defined kind of fear. Okay, now, so let's talk about the everyday kinds of fears and ecology of fears. I just want to say at this point, if you have a question or a comment that you want to make, just indicate that to me and interrupt me. And I will certainly leave some time so we have time to have a conversation. Okay, so we can talk about existential fear. Anybody know what this is? The Scream by Munch. It's a Scandinavian noir painting, very famous painting from the beginning of the 20th century. And I found this to be very evocative of, if you think about how important images are to us, evocative of a kind of primal anxiety and primal fear. What do you see in this painting? Distress. What projects that distress? The expression on the human face, the elongation of it, the mouth that's opening, and the empty eye. They're not empty eye sockets, but they're huge sockets. What else creates a sense of anxiety visually in this painting?
Well, you've got these lines of red, leading us to the two guys in the background.
Yes, they're kind of, you don't know what those two figures are. Are they threatening? Are they?
Is this guy in the front responding to them or running away? Or?
Yes. Where are we? What has just happened? What is about to happen? And then the power of the lines that are not straight lines to reproduce that sense of a kind of anxiety, an anxious reaction. And of course, the power of the color red, right? Almost like the green and the blue seem to have something to do with the natural coloring of a landscape, but the red is a kind of running of what? Blood, hot anxiety, whatever. The colors are also working to create that sense of anxiety.
His face is green.
Yes, and the face being green. Yeah. So, so if we think about existential fear is the kind of the human condition, the kind of fear of we're born vulnerable. We live in precarity, in precarious times. And threats of violence or threats we sense are all around us. So existential fear is the fear of the dread of death, the fear of meaninglessness also, the fear of oblivion, the fear of the unknown, which brings back that comment that was made earlier about the unknown. So this is shared, and it's transhistorical in a way, that existential dread. Okay, now this is a poem by, we're having a poem now, we've had a painting, now we're going to a poem. But this is I came upon this when I was out looking for poems. Her poem called In This Short Life That Only Lasts an Hour. All her poems are usually the first line of the poem itself. But look at this. In this short life that only lasts an hour, how much, how little is within our power? And look at what she does on the page. I think this is a reproduction about what she would have done on the page.
She really says it in 2 sentences.
Isn't it that amazing? And also that is the short life between those two lines. So you get on the page a graphic, use of the type, use of the lines, to get a sense of that opening, and that opening is empty. What is it? It's all the unknown. It's all, or it's an absence of any way that we have power to affect the life that we have. So there's a way in which this poem by Dickinson captures a kind of existential condition. Only, of course, she leaves that open. It's unfilled. She's not filling in how we're supposed to navigate this space of our life.
And there's no question mark.
Yep. There's no, actually, except there's dashes. She often doesn't have very much punctuation, yeah. But it's, I mean, think of her sitting in her upstairs bedroom, writing these thousands of poems and capturing powerfully the human condition. Okay, now this one should give you excitement this morning. This is powerful for me because it's an imagining of this figure's existential dread. Now, this is Francisco Goya. Anybody seen Goya paintings? No, Goya. The Spanish painter, and working at the end of the 18th century, the beginning of the 19th century. And Goya, this is one of his, they're called the black paintings. These are the paintings he did at the end of his life. He was so horrified by what was happening with the Spanish monarchy, how it was oppressing all the people in the empire, and that nothing was, Napoleon was supposed to, kind of open up Spain, and he comes, and it's just more thumbs on the lives of the poor people. And so he does these paintings. They were never meant to be seen by anyone, and they were on the walls. He did this. These were in the walls of the home he was living in at the end of his life. And when he died, he had to leave Spain. He had to leave for his life. And he left these in this house, and then the owner, about 50 years later, had them taken off of the. It wasn't. I don't know exactly how they did it.
Was it painted on?
Yes, it was painted on the walls, so they might have taken off all of the plaster with it, whatever. And now you can see all the black paintings in the Prado in.
Living with this around?
You can imagine the existential dread if you're looking on this. But
He's probably trying to get out some of his fear and anxiety by doing that.
yes, and it's also sometimes the painting is just Saturn. He didn't name these paintings. They were in his house, so people gave these names to the paintings afterwards, figuring that this is probably Saturn, and I'll get back to that in a minute. Sometimes, as I have it here, it's called Saturn devouring his son. But if you know Saturn, then you know Saturn was the Roman god he was the equivalent of the Greek god Zeus. No, sorry, the child is Zeus. You know how the gods have both Roman names and Greek names. So anyway, Saturn was he was the head of the set of gods before the Olympian gods, where the system of Zeus replaced Zeus's father. Zeus defeated his father, who was the Greek god that's the same as Saturn, and takes over, and there's a new dispensation with the Olympian gods. Saturn has knowledge that he's supposed to be killed by his own son. And so to prevent that, in the mythology, he killed all his sons. But his wife, Gaia, or Hera, was the wife of Zeus. Gaia, anyway, put rocks in the swaddling clothes and gave it to Saturn to eat, which, I don't know, he ate it and didn't realize it was rocks. And so probably it was good that system was overthrown. But then she hides the son, and the son comes and kills him. So if you look at this, well, in this version, it's like the existential dread of having your power taken away from you, that it's a vision of power devouring its own to keep itself in place, and the figure of power, or a person of power. Yeah.
Did you say that Goya paintings were triggered?
I'm falling down on my duty.
Sorry.
Did you say that Goya painted these not to be seen by anybody, but they were triggered by the political and government of Spain?
Yep.
I don't know, was it towards the Inquisition and all that, and, so.
Well, it's long after the Inquisition, but
yeah.
there were Goya, the ones that you see that were before the last ones, the black paintings, a lot of them are about shooting squads, shooting peasants who are in uprisings.
So like the German Expressionism, no matter whether the timing is
Yeah.
the same,
Yep.
German Expressionism, I believe, was kind of a semi-impressionist perspective, like Van Gogh,
Yeah,
and it was, and those were all about health, and there was a lot of sickness then.
right.
And and so where German Expressionism was based on sickness and health problems, Goya painted these as political issues.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Or, I mean, that's a speculation. He didn't apparently leave a lot. He didn't, as I said, he didn't title these. He didn't even he couldn't save them when he had to flee from Spain. So it's hard to know. Yes. He was pretty terrified, as the case may be. Anyway, it's just, for me, it's like the Munch. These are paintings that visualize that sense of existential fear and dread. Okay, now I just upbeat for 1 minute and look at a a poem by Wendell Berry. When despair of the world grows in me and I wake in the night at the least sound, in fear of what my life and my children's lives may be, I go and lie down where the wood drake rests in his beauty on the water, and the great heron feeds. I come into the peace of wild things who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. I come into the presence of still water, and I feel above me the day-blind stars waiting with their light. For a time, I rest in the grace of the world and am free. That's just so you don't get lost in existential dread.
Pull us up again.
Pull-
We can continue.
Yes, now we continue on to, fear of oppression, systems of oppression. So there's all kinds of fear inbuilt into systems of oppression. It's the one like colonialism and settler colonialism in the U.S. and in Australia and New Zealand. Pervasive systems where there's a superiority, inferiority assignment of human beings. And the inferior are seen as less than fully human. A constant threats of physical violence rendered just a normal aspect of life, exploitation of people's labor, constraint of people's aspirations, control of their opportunities, and the maintenance of inequality in systems such as the system of racism. So, and that means that people in the positioning of where somebody is in a system of oppression is not the same for everybody who lives in that system. So we are differentially positioned. Here is a Howard Thurman. He was an influential black theologian in the first part, right in the middle of the 20th century. He was influential on Martin Luther King Jr. And he wrote a book called Jesus and the Dispossessed. It was sometime in the 30s or 40s. And I found this quote from him when I was reading around. I was looking for African American theologians and what they might have said about fear. And this is really powerful statement or analysis that he gives. The ever-present fear that besets the vast poor, or the title of his book, The Dispossessed, The economically and socially insecure is a fear of still a different breed. It is a climate closing in. It is like the fog of San Francisco or in London. It is nowhere in particular, yet everywhere. It is a mood which one carries around with himself, distilled from the acrid conflict with which his days are surrounded. It has its deep roots in the heart of the relations between the weak and the strong, between the controllers of environment and those who are controlled by it. It's a very powerful statement of how fear works in a system where there's this vast power differential in all aspects of life. So one of the effects is that, for instance, living in this kind of fear and oppression, fear and inequality, fear and systems of domination, people develop strategies on how to survive. And so the talk is something has been very important in African American families. Does everybody know what the talk is? Okay, then you all know that. But the talk about how to help your children, especially male children, understand how to carry themselves in public, what to do and what not to do. Those talks are probably coming back.
And broadening to the
Right. Right. And here he is again, Thurman, on fear. Fear then becomes the safety device with which the oppressed surround themselves in order to give some measure of protection from complete nervous collapse. How do they achieve this? In the first place, they make their bodies commit to memory ways of behaving that will tend to reduce their exposure to violence. And that's, of course, what the talk is meant to do, right? So in this case, fear is very much a part of, or understanding the fear is very much a part of surviving. Okay, so fear and patriarchy. I'm going to go through, yeah.
I wanted to ask about anticipated oppression.
Anticipatory, yeah.
Is there such a thing? I mean, I'm just thinking about today and the awakening that has happened with so many groups, as so many groups' oppression seems much more visible, and that it's likely to increase.
Right. And so, yes, anticipatory compliance, anticipatory fear, that this is the, how it is that that power keeps itself on top of people, in part by creating anticipatory fear as well. I mean, the conditions of understanding that life is fearful in these circumstances, and then psychologically people have anticipatory fear. And that can be life-saving, but it also can be debilitating, right? It can be a source of mental illness. Fear and the patriarchy. I'm not going to say much about this, except that we know that the ways in which women are subjects, and I don't want to confine this to just women, but also to LGBTQ plus people, and non-normative boys and men. They're also in a patriarchal system where there are a kind of binary understanding of the difference between men and women, and the privileging of women over men and femininity. Then there are these norms that people are expected to conform to, and non-normative people are also subject to violence in that kind of system. And so the first items here are about how it is that the patriarchal social arrangements and social systems produce a kind of everyday scenes of violence. And also the last one is about what's internalized on the part of those people who are the objects of that violence, like women and LGBT people, where the worry is not conforming to these patriarchal expectations and the gender binary, and becoming self-censoring, responding to the fear of being exposed to the violence from the outside by trying to self-censor oneself in terms of who one is, how one identifies, how one acts in the world. And I can't stop and talk about this, but this is a fabulous, one of the things that patriarchal systems reproduce is fear of the female, fear of femininity, fear of women. That's a part of the demonization of women. And biblically, of course, that got attached to Eve. But it's, but there are other ways in which that animus toward women and the feminine and femininity operates. And this is a Dürer print at a time, 1500, when the witch trials in Europe were, they were generating a lot of smoke, if we want to, putting a lot of witches to death for their heresies. The church was doing that. And this captures this powerful, if you look at that figure on top of that goat, how powerful it is. And if you look at that long enough, you'll realize that the hair is defying nature. Because the goat's going this way, the hair is going this way too. You can't have that. That's unnatural. And of course, witches were one of the things that they were feared for is the fact that they could stop natural processes. They could reverse them. Anyway, this captures the way in which the feminine, especially a lot of witches were women, older women without male attachments. They were widows, they were women who never got married. It's the threat of these unattached women to men within patriarchal systems that creates this anxiety about powerful female figures. Okay, and we know that in the realm of politics, that fear is used as a organizing principle, bedrock, media. Sometimes there's a reason for that, but a lot of times it's to stoke up people's limbic system, to get the just visceral fear for themselves, their families, and it can be about the fear of crime, terrorism, political foes, the anxiety about loss and financial instability, the fear of the loss of social and cultural identity. That's what we're seeing a lot of now through demographic changes and changing social norms. The fear of instability and chaos, conspiracy and corruption, the fear of the outsider, that's just, I mean, that's always there. But in these times, it's ratcheted up. And in times of war, it gets ratcheted up too. And then the fear of intellectual inquiry and critique and of the imagination. All of these are used politically, or politicians can tap these fears that people have and consolidate them into a whole political system that is held in place by this threat, this sense that there are threats to everything. Yeah.
Sid, I just wanted to, I had to add.
Yeah.
Just, what the psychological research would just add to
Yeah.
this is just that when people have this form of fear, then they become much less other focused.
Yep.
And much more self-focused. So
Yeah.
the chance of mobilization of
Right.
groups is much lower
Right.
when this is present as well.
Right. Right. It's a kind of turning inward to protect oneself. This is just these powerful images from Leni Riefenstahl's Triumph of the Will. Probably everybody in here has seen that film. Is that her 1935, I think? One of the greatest filmmakers in the first part, and one of the greatest female filmmakers in the first part of the 20th century. But she served the Nazi regime. And so she lost, after the war, she was not able to make any more movies. But she did this one of Hitler's parades and rallies, and you can see how powerful these images are. Her film, every shot in that film is to produce the vision of the leader and the obeisance of the masses in their adoration of the leader. And so this small, I just wanted you to see her name, Leni Riefenstahl, Triumph of the Will. This is a different shot, but it's from that rally. And it's a projection of power, and it's a projection of fear us, we are powerful. And it's a projection of the attachment of people to a leader who is feeding them back images of why their lives have been so terrible and how they're going to be wonderful now. And so, anyway, it's if you haven't ever seen it, if you can see it, it's okay. Then there's moral fear. I've got to go more quickly. Now we get to religion. Moral fear, guilt, shame, our fear of guilt, our fear of moral error, our anxiety about disappointing others, violating ethical principles, and it plays a role of regulating behavior. These fears, or this environment or ecology of fear, is also effective in regulating the behavior of people. So, and we know that here's Bosch's, Hieronymus Bosch's powerful paintings from the 16th century of the movement down into hell. And the colors, the fire, the way, a kind of power of those, the legs, the arms, the bodies that are put into almost untenable positions, the creatures that are hounding, it's the hounds of hell. So we know that fear is a part of religious practices, the fear of divine judgment, the self-loathing for the weakness for our weakness as human beings, the fear that we'll be excommunicated, the fear of that we'll be sacrilegious or found or shunned for blasphemy, the fear of a loss of social hierarchy, and the existential fear of death and what might come afterwards. So in moral fear then becomes a part of the way in which religious institutions and practices incorporate a kind of ecology of fear. And that the Reformation, I mean, there are various ways in which the church is also fighting against, and religious practices can resist that. Fear not in Christianity. Fear not. Christ is in the boat. That famous passage from Matthew. And these are just, if you think about the Middle Ages and the importance of stained glass windows, it was a library. That was the visual library that was the Bible. And so that became a way in which people became visuate instead of literate. I don't know what you call that, visually astute, knowledgeable. And so I just put these in because these critters are looking down at people from the cathedrals all along the windows as reminders about what's the possible future for them. Okay, I also want to mention social fears, fear of social relations. And we could talk about the relationship of fear of the other and fear of strangers and fear of the non-normative and scapegoating, how that works collectively. Social fears often are collectively done, like moral panics. The panic about AIDS, the panic about such and such a condition, the panic about changing gender roles or people changing genders. And so I just wanted to note those social fears. And then fears, social media and fears. Our young people and some of us, we're in an environment and an ecology online, especially with social media, that magnifies social fears and anxieties, the fear of missing out or having a dull life because everybody else's life out there looks so wonderful. They put so many happy pictures on there. The fear of danger, of doxing, the fear of being canceled, and that's all stimulated by the algorithms, because the algorithms are delivering things to your feeds that are tied to your fears, because you're out looking for something about your fears and your loneliness. So you just get more to account for. And then quickly, I want to talk about fear in the body, and I'll do it through this book called My Grandmother's Hands, which is a fabulous book by Resmaa Menakem. Our body is, we know that, or we talked earlier about the amygdala and the limbic system as an embodied system for generating and processing fear and responses to fear. But there are also the unconscious processes, the processes where trauma is suppressed, and it's in the body, but it can't come out. It's not coming out. It's caught in the body. And that can affect habits of the body, how we stand, how we carry ourselves, how we think about our bodies. It can affect the bodily illnesses and mental illnesses, and there can be, it can come out in phobias. Bill mentioned phobias and nightmares, and in loathing of one's own embodiment, the fear of one's own embodiment and the loathing of it. And I just want to read a couple, this passage from Menakem. Trauma always happens in the body. It is a spontaneous protective mechanism used by the body to stop or thwart further or future potential damage. And so for Menachem, the social ecology, he's interested in particular about the way in which structural racism gets sedimented in the body. And he calls that structural sedimentation a collective agony of the body. That the title of the book comes from his attempt to understand how his grandmother's hands embodied the history of American slavery. What they did when she was a sharecropper, how they're gnarled in particular ways, how all of that trauma and that living in systems that have fear as a kind of everyday undercurrent, how that is, we embody that. And he says he saw a collective agony materializes in his grandmother's hands that compels collective recognition of the impacts of white body supremacy and the importance of healing through body-centered practices, which are incorporated throughout his analysis as a form of racial reckoning. And it's very interesting because his book has all these how to work with people's and their bodies, how to go to the body to work on the sedimentation on the body of a collective agony of racist relationships. Okay, so all of those, I just wanted to put out there all these different ecologies of fear and the context of them, and just so you can think broadly about what it is. And then I'll just close with 3 quotes. One is by Krista Tippett. How many of you know Krista Tippett and her On Being, or Speaking of Being? We know that if we are in pain, if we're frightened, if we don't acknowledge it and walk through it, it will haunt us. It will still be there, and it will come out in destructive ways. That's what we see happening politically now. And then from James Baldwin, the beautiful picture of Baldwin here. Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. And then Mary Oliver, when the thumb of fear lifts, we are so alive. Mm-hmm. We know that we experience multiple kinds of fears, and we are differently positioned in the history of that fearfulness, of conditions of fearfulness. Our struggle involves gaining greater understanding of our vulnerabilities and those of others in order to gain greater wisdom and greater compassion. The struggle involves summoning small and forceful acts of courage that enable us to navigate fearful environments and mediate their destructive effects, to forge strategies of hope, to pursue obligations to abate the fears of others, and to make meaningful change despite our fearfulness. So this is just the opening of kind of the first of 3 discussions about fear, and I hope it's been useful. And I'm sorry I went over it, and I'm sorry I had so much to say, and you haven't. Thank you.
Sid, I'm sure I'm not alone. I'm so glad you had so much to say. As always, it was a beautiful talk.
Thank you.
One that we'll go back to. And as you know, there's a little gift coming. And what I love is this one is already growing.
Oh, thank you.
And I feel like this is what you do to us.
Oh,
You help us grow. I mean, and thank you for such a beautiful talk. And just to, again, preview what's coming, George Lambrides is coming next.
Yes, George Lambrides. I think we're in for another treat following
so much.
all the good things that Sid said to us today. He's going to be talking about facing our fears, constructive ways of confronting our fears that are not constructive. He's going to have a lot of illustrations, I think, of both those things to help us understand how to go about dealing with all of that Sid shared with us. Yeah.
Thank you, Nancy. And then the last session is about dealing with embodied fear and trauma. And we have Kate Drinkwater, who's going to come, who's a therapist and works with that. It'll be our final session. And it was actually Sid, I think, in our committee that said, with Advent being about hope, that we need to pair it with again, speaking and honoring the fear so that hope is grounded. So that's why we're doing this in Advent. So thank you again, Sid.
thank you, Jane. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for coming.